Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep today into breaking those old patterns that we all have. You know the ones I'm talking
The
about?
ones that are holding us back.
Exactly. And to do that, we've got this lecture here that covers some really practical strategies for making changes in your life. We're talking like psychology, neuroscience, mindfulness, a little bit of everything.
Yeah, a really good mix. What's really interesting here is that we talk about our brains being like hardwired,
Mhm.
but the truth is our brains are adaptable. It's called neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity.
Yeah, it's the brain's ability to rewire itself.
Oh, I love that. So it's not about being stuck with the same wiring forever.
No, not at all. This lecture explains how those habits are formed in the brain, the good and the bad ones. And it boils down to our reward system and the creation of those neural pathways. Imagine like a path in the woods.
Okay.
The more you walk it, the deeper it gets. Our brains work kind of the same way. So repeating a thought or behavior, it strengthens those connections. So those nights I stay up late worrying instead of sleeping, I'm actually strengthening the neural pathways for anxiety.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah.
But the good news is we can create new pathways too. It takes effort, but the brain can adapt and change.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
And speaking of change, the lecture also goes into the subconscious mind. I'm curious to hear your take on this. How much control do we have over that hidden part of ourselves?
Well, the subconscious is powerful, that's for sure. It often runs on autopilot, based on past experiences and beliefs.
Even from childhood.
Even from childhood, it's like an operating system running in the background. It influences our thoughts and feelings and behaviors without us realizing it.
That reminds me of that quote, the conscious mind is the tip of the iceberg,
Yeah.
while the subconscious is that massive part underneath.
Exactly. And sometimes those subconscious patterns, well, they aren't serving us anymore, even if they feel familiar and safe. Our ego, that sense of self, can cling to what it knows, even if it's holding us back from growth.
So how do we start to uncover these subconscious patterns and understand how they're affecting us?
Well, this lecture, it suggests focusing on certain mental traps that we often fall into.
Okay.
Patterns of thinking and behaving that keep us stuck.
Yeah.
Think about things like negative self-talk or procrastination, or even perfectionism.
Oh, yeah. I'm definitely guilty of those. I get caught in those thought loops like, I'm not good enough or I'll never be able to do that. It's like a broken record.
Well, that's a perfect example of that negative self-talk, and something so many people struggle with. The lecture points out that these tendencies often stem from our childhood experiences or social conditioning. Maybe you were criticized a lot as a kid, or you learned that your worth was tied to your achievements.
That makes a lot of sense. So these early experiences can shape our beliefs even years later,
Yeah.
and we might not even realize how these patterns are affecting us now.
Exactly. It's like driving a car with the parking brake on. You might be putting in the effort, but something is holding you back. And until you release that brake, those limiting beliefs, you're not going to move forward.
So how do we release the parking brake, so to speak? This lecture mentions some practical strategies for breaking these patterns. What are some of the key takeaways that stood out to you?
This lecture really emphasizes awareness. Like turning on the light in a dark room. Suddenly you can see what's there. And mindfulness practices can really help with this.
Mindfulness. I've tried meditation before, but I always struggled to quiet my mind. It felt like more thoughts, not less. Is there a trick to it?
Yeah, a lot of people experience that.
Mhm.
At first, the goal of meditation isn't to have like a blank mind, but to observe your thoughts without judging.
Okay.
It's about creating a space between you and your thoughts so you're not so caught up in them.
So instead of being swept away, it's more about noticing them as they go by.
Exactly. And the more you practice it, the easier it becomes to detach from those negative thought patterns and choose more empowering ones.
Yeah?
The lecture also talks about cognitive restructuring,
Oh, yeah.
which is a powerful tool.
I remember reading about that. It's like being a lawyer for your own thoughts, right?
That's it.
Instead of just accepting them as truth, you question them.
Exactly. And the lecture has some really practical tips. For example, one technique is to identify what are called cognitive distortions.
Cognitive distortions. What are
They're
those?
like thinking errors.
Okay.
Common ways that our minds distort reality, like all or nothing thinking,
Okay.
where you see things in black and white, or catastrophizing, where you always imagine the worst case scenario. Once you become aware of these, you can challenge them and reframe your thinking.
I'm starting to get how this all works. But what about when those negative thoughts feel so real? Like they're part of me?
Yeah. Well, that's where techniques like visualization and neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, they can be really powerful. They work on a deeper level to rewire those patterns.
NLP, I've heard that term. but I don't really know what it is. Can you break it down?
Yeah, so NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and it's a field that explores how our thoughts, our language, and behaviors all interact to create our reality. And it offers a lot of techniques for changing these patterns.
So it's like a toolbox for rewiring our brains.
Exactly. And the lecture focuses on a couple of NLP techniques that are really helpful. One is called anchoring.
Anchoring, like on a boat.
It's a similar concept.
Oh, okay.
Imagine you have a memory that gives you a strong positive feeling.
Okay.
Maybe a time you felt really confident or calm. With anchoring, you pair a physical gesture, like squeezing your thumb and forefinger together, with that state.
Oh, interesting.
So you're creating a trigger for that feeling.
That sounds useful for those moments when you just need like a boost.
It is. It's a great tool to interrupt those negative responses and shift into a more resourceful state.
I like that. The lecture also mentions another NLP technique, the swish pattern. It sounds kind of magical.
It does. The swish pattern is a technique for changing unwanted behaviors or thoughts really quickly.
So if I keep picturing myself failing, I could use the swish pattern to change that.
Exactly. It involves vividly imagining that unwanted thought or image
Okay.
and instantly replacing it with a better one.
So it's like swapping out a negative mental movie for a positive one.
You got it.
Yeah.
And by repeating this, you are rewiring your brain to associate that trigger with a positive outcome.
This is so interesting, but I think we should also acknowledge that change is hard, and we all face setbacks. What are some ways to stay motivated when things get tough?
Well, the lecture talks about creating a good environment.
Okay.
So surrounding yourself with supportive people, people who encourage you and challenge you.
It's interesting you say that. I've noticed that my environment really affects me. Like if my workspace is cluttered, I just don't feel productive.
Yeah. Our surroundings play a big role in our behaviors. The lecture also emphasizes the importance of building resilience,
Okay.
cultivating that growth mindset, seeing challenges as opportunities to learn,
Yeah.
and bouncing back.
So instead of getting down on myself when I mess up, it's more about treating it as a learning experience.
Exactly. And a great way to do this is through reflection.
Okay.
The lecture recommends journaling to track your progress and celebrate your wins.
Yeah, journaling can be so powerful. It's like having a conversation with yourself.
It is. And it's a space to process your experiences and celebrate your progress. And change takes time. So remember that.
This has been such a good exploration into how our minds work and how we can create change. What's the one big takeaway that resonated with you?
I think for me, it was the idea that we are not our thoughts.
Oh, interesting.
You can choose which ones to empower.
That's a powerful message. It means we're not victims of our past. We can create the lives we want.
Yeah, it's really amazing to think about, that we have this ability to change within us. This lecture really emphasizes that our brains aren't static. They're always changing.
That's right. And this deep dive has given us so many tools to use.
Yeah.
From mindfulness to cognitive restructuring to visualization and even NLP. We've got a lot of strategies to break free from old patterns.
I'm curious, though, with all these different approaches, how do we know where to start?
It's a bit overwhelming.
It's a good point. The lecture emphasizes that it's not about finding the one right way,
Oh, okay.
but it's about finding what works best for you. What works for one person might not work for another. It's about being a student of your own mind.
It's just about self-discovery, not like following a formula.
Yeah, exactly. Paying attention to what your mind and body are telling you. And remember, this is a journey, not a race. There will be times you fall back into old patterns.
No, that's okay.
It's okay. It's part of the process.
That's reassuring. It takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
Having to be perfect all the time.
Exactly.
It's about progress.
Yes. And be kind to yourself. Celebrate those wins and learn from your setbacks. It's all an opportunity for growth.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. I feel like I understand so much more now about how my mind works
That's great.
and how I can change. Before we wrap up, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's feeling inspired to make a change?
I would say start with just one small change.
Okay.
Something you can do today. Doesn't have to be big. Maybe it's 5 minutes of mindfulness every morning,
Okay.
or challenging one negative thought, or even just working on that goal you've been putting off. Small steps can make a big difference.
I like that. We don't need to make these huge changes all at once. We can start small.
Right now.
Right now.
That's the key.
That's awesome. This has been great. It reminds us that we have the power to shape our lives.
We really do.
Yeah.
And there's so many resources out there to help you.
Well, this brings us to the end of our deep dive into breaking old patterns. I hope this was helpful for you. Remember, you have the power to change.
To new beginnings.
Until next time, keep diving deep.